A single order Blair refused to withdraw sends quiet ripples through Lochdup, leaving Hamish Macbeth to navigate stubborn pride and rising tension. In this village, standing your ground can be just as dangerous as backing down. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? And if you enjoy settling into these Highland mysteries, subscribe and make this part of your nightly ritual. Only 11% are subscribed while 89% aren't. Your support truly means a lot. Hamish had meant only to buy tea bags and maybe a biscuit if Patel had the cheap ones in. Instead, he found trouble pasted in bright yellow across the shop door. The rain had been steady since dawn, thin and nagging, the sort that soaked a man without looking dramatic. Lugs trotted at his heels, ears twitching, already uneasy. The dog stopped first. Hamish followed his gaze and read the notice. Immediate closure. Public health risk. By order of Detective Inspector Blair, Strathbane. Mrs. Patel stood stiffly on the pavement, arms folded in front of her as if holding herself together. A few villagers hovered nearby, pretending they were only passing. Hamish felt his stomach sink. Blair's work. Only Blair would choose a yellow sheet big enough to be seen from the kirk, like some shameful banner. Hamish pushed open the shop door. Blair was inside, his coat dripping on the floor, pointing at a shelf as if he had discovered plague spores. A young man with a clipboard stood beside him, pale and nervous. Hamish thought he looked like someone sent to fetch canteen orders, not close shops. "You canny do this, Blair," Hamish said. "The whole village uses this place." Blair straightened up as if posing for a camera. "I just did," he said. "Serious breaches. Disgraceful, really." "Is play." Lugs's hackles rose. "Who's that?" Hamish asked quietly. Blair didn't bother looking. Probably someone sick of buying stale biscuits. Outside, the murmuring knot of villagers grew thicker. Mrs. Wellington whispered something behind her hand, and the crofter beside her nodded as if he had known it all along. A few stared directly at Mrs. Patel, then looked away quickly, embarrassed. Others looked angry, but none said much. Lochdu folk avoided open conflict the way they avoided expensive shopping trips. Hamish stepped out of the shop. Mrs. Patel's face crumpled for a moment before she steadied it. "I clean every day," she said. "Every shelf, every counter. They didn't even look properly." "They looked for what Blair told them to look for," Hamish said. "I'll sort it." She didn't look reassured. "People think I've let things slip." "You haven't," he said. It sounded weak even to him. Then Mrs. McLean, always full of helpful observations, piped up. "Well, I did think your curry pies were different last month. Too much oil." Mrs. Patel stared at her. Hamish almost swore. "That's not a health breach, Mrs. McLean. That's preference." "Aye, well," she sniffed. "But too much oil can make folk ill." "Only if they're made of tissue paper," Hamish muttered. A few villagers snorted. Others frowned as if he'd insulted them personally. Social loyalty in Lochdu was thin as tracing paper at the best of times. Trying to lighten the mood, Hamish said, "We can all live off tinned beans a while. Good for your constitution." No one laughed. Mrs. Patel looked at him as if he had kicked her cat. He felt his ears burn. "It was a joke," he added, which made it worse. The villagers stood in an awkward silence. Someone coughed. Hamish wished the rain would wash them all down the street. Patel came out from behind his wife. "Inspector Blair said there were dirty corners." "There are dirty corners everywhere," Hamish said, "including Blair's mind." "That's no help to us," Patel said. Not rude, just tired. Hamish felt the words settle on him like guilt. Inside the shop, Kellock applied the seal, hands trembling slightly. Blair announced the closure to the gathering crowd as if he were unveiling a monument. "For the safety of the public," he said grandly. Hamish watched Kellock again. The young inspector walked stiffly to his car, keeping one hand pressed to the pocket where he had hidden the letter. He did not look back. Blair remained for a final flourish. "This shop will stay closed until I withdraw the order," he said, loud enough for everyone, "and I won't be rushed." Hamish met his eyes. Blair looked pleased with himself, which was never a good sign. Lugs gave a soft whine, sensing trouble far better than Hamish could explain. A few villagers drifted away, whispering. A couple of tourists stopped to take in the spectacle, pleased at having something to talk about over breakfast. Patel locked his door with shaking hands. Hamish stood alone for a moment under the dripping eaves. He had refused a direct order. Patel's livelihood was hanging by a yellow sheet of paper, and half of Lochdu already believed the worst. He felt the weight of it, heavy and familiar. Trouble never arrived quietly. He scratched Lugs behind the ears. "A mess, boy," he said. "A right mess." Lugs leaned against his leg, warm and worried. Hamish didn't go inside the station right away. He didn't want to look at his desk or the paperwork waiting on it. Blair would ring soon enough. Instead, he stood in the street, watching the rain streak the yellow notice until the ink began to blur at the edges. It wouldn't wash away the damage. Lochdu would remember this morning long after the paper peeled off. Hamish turned at last and headed back toward the station, Lugs at his heels. The village felt smaller than usual, and unfriendly in the way only a familiar place could be when suspicion had taken hold. The trouble began before Hamish had even got his first proper swallow of tea. Patel's delivery lorry, which usually brought bread and tins and the odd crate of fruit, rolled up to the shuttered shop and then rolled off again without touching the brakes. Mrs. Patel stood on the pavement with her apron still on, waving uselessly after it. Hamish saw her from the station window. She looked as if the lorry had stolen something precious instead of groceries. He went out at once. Lugs padded behind him, uneasy again. Hamish felt the same way. Lochdu without Patel's shop was like a table missing a leg. Everything wobbled. "They wouldn't unload," Mrs. Patel said, wiping her face quickly as if the tears were rain. "They said the order means they can't risk it." Hamish looked at the yellow notice nailed to the door. Blair's wretched triumph. He lowered his voice. "Come round the back." She hesitated. He could see her weighing fear against need. He pushed the back gate open himself. "If folk come by here, I'll not see it," he said. It was a foolish thing for a policeman to say, but he said it anyway. She stared at him, then nodded. A tired nod. "Only for some things," she said. "The basics." "Aye," he said, though he knew it would not stay at basics for long. Word travelled faster than he expected. By mid-morning, a crofter with a soaked cap slipped behind the shop and came out clutching bread. An hour later, a fisherman wandered in with a sheepish look and left with tins under his jacket. Each time Hamish heard the door creak, he felt more like an accomplice than an officer. By noon, half the street knew. They didn't say it openly. They said things like, "Funny how some folk always manage," or "Certain people get their needs met." There was always a nasty sweetness when villagers talked about fairness. Old Mrs. McLean arrived at the station, banging her walking stick on the door. "I'm not on the list," she announced before he could say hello. "There is nae list," Hamish said. Her eyes narrowed. "Aye, that's what someone on the list would say." He felt his temper tug. "There is no list," he repeated louder. "Folk just come if they need something." "So there is a system," she said smugly, "and I've been left out." "There is no system," Hamish snapped and heard how it sounded. Lugs flattened his ears. Mrs. McLean pursed her lips as if she had caught him plotting treason. "I'll remember this," she said, and marched off to tell the entire village. By mid-afternoon, Lochdu felt sour. Some crofters glared at others for having bread when they did not. The fishers who had visited the back door pretended innocence, which fooled no one. Hamish walked the main street and heard muttering behind curtains. So much for helping quietly. He was heading back to the station when he saw a familiar car pull up by Patel's shop. Kellock stepped out, looking as if he wished he were anywhere else. He carried a clipboard again. Hamish's stomach tightened. "Back so soon?" Hamish asked. "I'm to inspect the perimeter," Kellock said. His voice wobbled. "We received notice that someone may be attempting access." Hamish forced a shrug. "Folk wander everywhere. It's a village, not a base." Kellock walked around the side path. Hamish followed, cursing inwardly. Muddy footprints led straight to the back door. Fresh ones. He'd wiped his own boots but forgotten the others. Inside, the kettle sat warm on its stand where Mrs. Patel had made tea not half an hour ago. Kellock pointed. "Someone has been here, Constable." Hamish spoke quickly. "I was checking the pipes. Leak in the wee sink. Needed boiling water for the joints." Kellock didn't look as if he believed a word. He scribbled something. "The closure order remains in force," he said. "Any interference will carry consequences." "Consequences seem to be all you folk deal in," Hamish muttered. "What was that?" "Nothing," Hamish said. Kellock left with the clipboard pressed tight to his chest, as if he expected someone to snatch it. The moment he turned the corner, the station landline rang. Hamish knew it would be Blair. "Macbeth!" Blair roared before Hamish could greet him. "What the hell are you doing letting folk near that shop?" Hamish held the receiver a little away from his ear. "Folk walk where they want." "You stay out of it," Blair spat. "The order will not be withdrawn on a whim. Daviot stands with me." Hamish didn't answer. Blair took silence as obedience, which suited Hamish well enough. He hung up to find a tourist couple outside the station. The man's face was grey. "We bought sweets from that wee shop yesterday," he said. "My wife's been sick all afternoon." Hamish eyed the man. He looked soft from too much sitting, not poisoned. "How many did you eat?" The man flushed. "A few." "He ate half the bag," the woman said sharply, "and whiskey last night." "It might have been the sweets," the man insisted, raising his voice so that a passing villager turned. "That shop should have been closed sooner." Hamish felt the knot tighten. "You're fine," he said. "Go lie down." The man looked offended, but Hamish didn't care. It was greed and whiskey, not Patel's sweets. Still, the villagers nearby had heard enough to set tongues wagging. By evening, someone would be saying Patel had poisoned a tourist. By tomorrow, 2 tourists. 3 by the end of the week. Luggs nudged his knee, anxious. Hamish gave him a half-hearted pat. The dog's ears were flat, sensing the sour air. The sun went down early, and the village settled into one of those tight silences that meant trouble. Hamish stood outside the shuttered shop again, staring at the yellow notice hanging limp in the damp air. It looked flimsy, but it held more weight than anything else in Lochdu today. He had bent the rules before, and he would again, but this time it felt riskier. Patel's shop had become a symbol of pride, of suspicion, of Blair's spite, and Hamish was tangled in the middle of it. He hadn't meant to create a secret shop. He hadn't meant to start a list that didn't exist. But Lochdu had its own way of building walls where none were needed. A door shut somewhere up the street. Someone was watching from an upstairs window. Hamish felt their eyes judging him. He went back into the station and shut the door softly. The kettle rattled on the stove. Luggs lay down with a sigh. The smell of damp uniforms and cold peat filled the room. Hamish looked at the silent telephone and waited for the next mistake to arrive. Luggs began whining before dawn, pacing in sharp little circles by the station door. Hamish tried ignoring him, but the dog pressed his nose against Hamish's knee and let out another low, miserable sound. Something was wrong. It would not be the first time Luggs sensed trouble before Hamish caught the scent. "All right then," Hamish muttered, "but if it's only a fox, I'll not forgive you." The outside air was damp and thick, the kind that clung to hair and clothes. A thin mist lay across the loch path, not grand or dramatic, just unsettled. Luggs trotted ahead, ears pricked. Hamish followed, yawning. The road felt slick under his boots. Without warning, Luggs bolted. His bark cracked the quiet like a match strike. Hamish swore and ran after him, sliding once on the wet grass. He stopped dead. Kellock lay half in the water, one shoe gone, one trouser leg darkened all the way up to the knee. His glasses sat crooked on his face. His flask lay a few feet away, as if he had dropped it mid-step. For a moment, Hamish hoped the man was only unconscious, but the stillness was too complete. When he crouched closer, he noticed the bruise at the back of Kellock's skull. Not a small one, not the sort from slipping neatly into a puddle. Hamish breathed out through his teeth. Damn. He left Luggs whining at the body's edge and went to the nearest phone box. The landline clicked and echoed as he called Strathbane. Anderson answered, sounding put upon even before Hamish finished describing the situation. Blair arrived 40 minutes later, breathing heavily, his coat flapping like a miserable flag. "What nonsense have you dragged me into now?" Blair demanded, staring down at Kellock with no more feeling than if he were looking at a broken chair. "Open and shut. Drunk slipped, cracked his skull. The locks claimed worse." Hamish pointed at the bruise. "You don't get that from slipping on your backside." Blair glared at him. "Are you accusing me of not knowing my own inspector's habits?" "You're the one who said he was in Strathbane last night," Hamish said. "But look at his watch." Blair stomped over as if he meant to frighten the dead man. The watch had stopped at a time that did not suit Blair's claim at all. Blair snapped. "Watches stop in water, Macbeth. Do you not know anything?" "Aye, they do," Hamish said mildly, "but the bruise came first." Blair didn't like that answer. He straightened up and shouted for Anderson, who was poking near a bush as if hoping to find an excuse to leave. "We need to secure the area," Blair boomed, though he hadn't bothered securing anything else in his life. By now, a few villagers had gathered. A fisherman and 2 tourists stood a little back, murmuring like crows. Hamish hated crowds at scenes like this. They reminded him of how quickly gossip grew teeth. Blair turned triumphantly toward them. "This is connected to the Patel business," he announced. "Inspector Kellock's last inspection was at that shop, and Mr. Patel has motive enough." Hamish stiffened. "He'd never harm a soul," he said, too loud, too quickly. It came out sounding foolish, even to him. Anderson laughed under his breath. "Taking sides before the post-mortem, are we, Macbeth?" The fisherman stepped closer. "I saw Kellock last night near the kirk," he said. "He was arguing with someone. Stocky man, too short to be Patel." He said it like a confession, quick and nervous. "Why didn't you report that?" Blair barked. The fisherman looked at Hamish instead of Blair. "Didn't I seem my business?" he muttered, flushing with shame. "Folk argue." "Aye, and sometimes they die," Blair snapped. Hamish ignored him and studied the satchel lying a few inches from Kellock's hand. It sat open, empty. No notebook, no papers. Kellock had carried a thick notebook when inspecting Patel's place. Hamish remembered the way he had tucked that folded letter into his pocket too. Now both were missing. Blair noticed Hamish staring at the satchel and seized the moment. "Evidence has been removed," he declared, sweeping his hand dramatically toward Patel's shop in the distance. "We'll need to look very closely at what Mr. Patel is hiding." Hamish felt a burn of anger rise in him. Blair's tone was smug enough to make Satan blush. "You don't know that," Hamish said. "Anyone could have taken it." "Anyone with access," Blair said, which Patel had. Anderson, sensing which way the wind blew, chimed in like a bad echo. "Aye, Patel had plenty of reason to want Kellock quiet. That closure order was a hard blow." The tourists nearby leaned in, eager for scandal. One whispered loudly, "So the shopkeeper killed him?" Hamish turned on them. "No, and keep your daft ideas to yourself." It was a mistake to snap. They took a step back, offended, which only made the villagers look more sure that Hamish was covering something. Blair's mobile car radio crackled, and he grinned before even lifting the receiver. Daviot's nasally voice spilled through, jittery as always. Blair began loudly suggesting that Patel may have attempted a bribe, been refused, and lost his temper. Daviot, easily panicked by any sniff of public embarrassment, muttered something about handling things firmly but delicately, which Blair took as permission to bulldoze through the village. Hamish folded his arms. He'd made one large mistake already in defending Patel too quickly in front of everyone. He saw Mrs. McLean hovering at the edge of the crowd, nodding vigorously every time Blair mentioned Patel's name. She would spread the worst version before lunchtime. The fisherman who had seen the argument shuffled closer again. "I couldn't see the man's face," he said quietly to Hamish. "Just that he was heavier than me. Broad shoulders, dark jacket." "Not Patel," Hamish said. The fisherman reddened. "I didn't say that." Lugs pressed against Hamish's leg, sensing the tension tightening between the villagers and the police. The dog's ears flicked to every raised voice. Blair barked at Hamish. "You'll secure the scene until the body's moved, and no more interfering with my investigation. You've done enough." It was humiliation, dressed as an order. Hamish didn't reply. The crowd began to disperse slowly, whispering in that self-important way villagers had when they thought they carried knowledge. The tourists walked off quickly, eager for breakfast gossip. Hamish watched the mist shift across the loch, dull and indifferent. The dead inspector lay at the edge like a dropped parcel no one wanted to claim. The bruise, the missing notebook, the man seen near the kirk. None of it fit Blair's neat little picture, but Blair had power, and Hamish had only his own stubborn sense of Loch Dhu. He gave Lugs a short pat. "This will get worse before it gets better," he murmured. Lugs whined as if he already knew. The station felt too small the next morning. Hamish could hardly cross the room without brushing someone's sleeve. Villagers drifted in and out as if the place were a public waiting room instead of a police office. They all claimed they were just wanting to check something, but their eyes kept sliding to the desk, the phone, the notice board. They wanted to hear whatever gossip Hamish might accidentally let slip. Mrs. McLean arrived first, coughing into her hand in an important way. "Thought you should know," she said. "Folk are saying Kellock was seen near the kirk again. Might have been up to something holy." She said it with such smugness that Hamish suspected she had invented the entire thing. She left without answering a single straight question. Then came a fisherman wanting to report a missing glove, then a schoolboy complaining that someone had taken his bike pump. Hamish knew these petty visits were excuses. Luggs knew too. The dog slumped in the corner with the look of a creature forced to endure fools all morning. The bell over the station door jingled again. Mrs. Patel stood there, pale. She clutched the strap of her handbag so tightly her knuckles whitened. "Blair said I might be arrested," she whispered. Hamish guided her inside. What did he actually say? That he'd be having another word and that I should be careful. I only told him he was ruining us. Then he stalked off like a man denied his supper. Hamish believed her. Blair disliked being contradicted, especially by people he considered beneath his notice. But the story, stripped of tone and context, would sound very different in Strathbane. Hamish said only, "Leave it with me." He didn't promise anything. Promises had a habit of sinking him. When she left, he stepped outside to clear his head. Luggs padded after him. Hamish looked down the street toward the manse. If there was gossip moving, Mrs. Wellington would already have it sorted into categories. He trudged up the path. The minister's wife greeted him with her usual bright, brittle smile. "Tea, constable? You look as if you've been living on damp bread." He accepted the cup because refusing her would cause more trouble. She leaned forward, voice dropping as if the minister might burst in and arrest her for speaking. "There's talk, you know. Some of the Kirk ladies say they always worried about Patel's food, hygiene and such. They didn't want to upset him." Hamish snorted softly. Folk remember illnesses that never were, but he noted it. How quickly mild fussiness became ancient fear when gossip needed fuel. Mrs. Wellington continued, pleased to have his attention. "That inspector, Kellock, he asked rather pointed questions at the fete last summer. Something about the accounts for the food stall. I thought it odd at the time." Hamish raised an eyebrow. "Fraud at a Kirk fete? Hardly a motive for killing a man." She shrugged. "Men have been murdered over less, I'm sure." Her tone suggested she would not be surprised to discover the minister himself had a second life as a jewel thief. Hamish finished his tea and left before she could imply any further village scandals. On the road back to the station, he ran into a visiting couple from the hotel. The husband, red-faced and impatient, blocked his way. "You're the policeman," the man said. "You should know your inspector was a rude little man." Hamish sighed inwardly. What did he do? "He tried flirting with my wife in the bar, drunk as a skunk." The wife, a tidy woman with an air of tolerance, added, "He said he'd annoyed the wrong people and that he'd sort it next morning. I didn't ask who. I didn't want a lecture." Hamish seized on the idea of a jealous husband pushing Kellock. It was clean, simple, and removed Lochdu from the centre of things. A relief. Probably wrong, but he allowed himself the comfort for a moment. That comfort ended the moment he stepped back into the station. Blair barged in behind him, cheeks flushed as if he'd run from Strathbane rather than driven. "What do you think you're doing, Macbeth?" he shouted. "Taking statements without my authority. You're not the detective inspector." Hamish said nothing. Blair thrived on reaction. Silence irritated him more. "You're a village bobby who cannae say no to a free cup of tea," Blair went on. "You'll bring Patel to Strathbane tomorrow for further questioning." Hamish stiffened. "He's no a suspect." Blair's face purpled. "You don't decide that." Anderson drifted in behind Blair, nodding like a dog hoping for scraps. "Best to follow procedure," he murmured. Procedure. In Strathbane, that meant dragging a frightened man into a bare interview room and letting Blair circle him until panic made him say something that could be twisted later. Hamish's stomach clenched. If he obeyed, Patel's reputation would shatter before noon. If he refused, Blair would happily see him sacked. Blair thumped a finger on the desk. "Tomorrow morning. Patel, don't make me repeat myself." He stormed out as dramatically as a man of his build could manage. Anderson followed, smirking. The station fell quiet again. Hamish looked at Luggs, who watched him with solemn brown eyes. The choice settled heavy in Hamish's chest. Either way, someone would pay. He closed the station door gently, though he wanted to slam it. The kettle clicked on the shelf. The lock outside lay still, pretending the world wasn't shifting under their feet. Hamish rubbed Luggs's head. "This won't end well," he said. Luggs lowered his ears, and Hamish stood there, already dreading tomorrow. Hamish began the morning with a knot in his stomach. Blair had ordered Patel to appear in Strathbane first thing, which usually meant Blair wanted a frightened man waiting on a hard chair while he finished his breakfast. The thought of Patel sitting alone in some grey corridor made Hamish itch with anger. He shut the station door, picked up the landline, and dialed the flat above the shuttered shop. Patel answered on the second ring, breathless as if he had run to the phone. "Blair wants you in Strathbane today," Hamish said quietly. "I cannae stop him asking, but I think you should wait." There was a tight pause. "Wait! I have nothing to hide, Hamish." "I know," Hamish said, "but you'd be paraded through half the city before anyone listens." Patel swallowed audibly. "He will say I am refusing." "Aye, he will," Hamish admitted. "See a solicitor first. Don't rush to answer summonses based on gossip." He heard Mrs. Patel in the background, fretting. Patel lowered his voice. "Are you sure?" Hamish hesitated. It was his deliberate mistake, and he felt it even as he made it. "Aye, just wait." He hung up before he could change his mind. Luggs watched him, ears low, as if he sensed Hamish had nudged something fragile. By mid-morning, the first rumblings arrived. Blair phoned the station in a fury that crackled down the line. "Macbeth, where is he? I said 9 o'clock sharp." Hamish steadied his voice. "He's not in any state to travel." "Not in any state?" Blair screeched. "He's a shopkeeper, not a princess." Before Hamish could answer, another voice joined, thin, anxious, and used to being obeyed. Daviot. "Constable Macbeth," Daviot said. "Why is the prime witness missing?" Hamish felt heat crawl up his neck. He lied before he could stop himself. "He might be emotionally unfit just now, sir. Family stress, the closure, the death." Anderson, hovering near Blair, muttered something Hamish couldn't catch. It sounded like a smirk, if smirks made noise. Daviot huffed. "Get him here. Soon. Quietly." The line went dead. Hamish stared at the receiver, wishing he had thrown it rather than answered it. Word spread quickly that Patel had ignored Strathbane. It twisted into something uglier by lunchtime. Luggs barked at the rumble of an unfamiliar engine. Hamish stepped outside to see a bright van parked near the hotel, Strathbane branding plastered across the side. The driver leaned out the window. "Fresh essentials," he called cheerfully. "Guaranteed hygiene." A few villagers bought things with embarrassed half-glances, stuffing overpriced bread into their coats. A crofter grumbled but still handed over money, muttering, "Just till things settle." Others glared, pretending they weren't tempted. Hamish approached the van. The driver grinned at him, too wide. "Business opportunity, Constable. Your village needed support." Hamish's eyes drifted to the small notebook on the dashboard. Tidy columns, the Strathbane logo. The driver snapped it shut. "Company property." When Hamish later passed through the hotel lobby, he saw the same man using the reception phone. His voice carried, "Aye, Mr. Blair. Making this closure stick, no bother." He caught Hamish watching and turned his back, shielding the receiver. Hamish left before he said something that would cost him his badge. He hoped for a quiet hour in the station to collect his thoughts. Instead, Mrs. Wellington stopped him outside the Kirk and said, "You're coming, I trust. They're doing a presentation tonight, for the good of the community." He had no idea what she meant until he walked into the Kirk Hall that evening. Chairs were lined up. A projector screen stood at the front. A stiff nurse from Strathbane, hair scraped back mercilessly, clicked through slides showing filthy countertops, mouldy corners, and one grainy picture that looked suspiciously like Patel's storeroom, though the angle was altered just enough to give deniability. Hamish stood. "You cannae show that here. The investigation's ongoing." The nurse folded her arms. "If the cap fits, Constable." Some villagers nodded. Others sank in their seats, embarrassed to be caught nodding. Patel himself had not come. His wife sat tight-lipped at the back, eyes on the floor. After the presentation, people milled around in stiff clusters. 2 different petitions circulated, one demanding the shop reopen at once, the other insisting on proper inspections and modern standards. The same villagers signed both, depending on who was watching. Hamish tried speaking to a few of them, but they evaded him with polite little smiles. One tourist said, "It's a shame about the shop," in the same tone one might use for a chipped teacup. By the time he stepped outside, the cold air felt like a slap. Lochdu was split down the middle and everyone pretended not to notice. Luggs pressed close to his leg, uneasy. Hamish rubbed the dog's head. "I only meant to help him," he muttered. But the act was no longer quiet, no longer kind. It was public now, a mark. Tomorrow, Blair would see to that. The loch air drifted past, thin and indifferent. Hamish turned toward the station, feeling the weight of the next day settle like damp wool on his shoulders. Hamish knew the day had started wrong the moment he rounded the corner by the hotel and saw the sleek silver car parked out front. Nothing that shiny belonged in Lochdu unless it came with bad news. When Priscilla Halberton Smythe stepped out, tall and elegant in a coat that probably cost more than his month's wages, Hamish felt his stomach fold in on itself. She saw him at once. Of course she did. "Hamish," she said, her voice polite in that chilly way she had perfected. "Priscilla." He tugged at his jacket, which only made it sit worse. "You're early in the year for visiting." "I'm here with my parents. We're speaking to representatives from a supermarket chain." She brushed an invisible speck from her sleeve. "They're looking at rural expansion." Hamish blinked. "A supermarket? Here?" His mind slammed straight to Patel, to the yellow notice still flapping on the shop door. "They're considering a development nearby," she said, as if reading his thoughts. "Land changes hands, it's ordinary business." "Ordinary for some," he muttered. She didn't answer, only nodded toward the hotel entrance. "Will you join me for coffee? I'd like to hear what's happening with Inspector Kellock." He wanted to refuse, but refusing Priscilla always felt like losing a game no one else had agreed to play. He followed her inside. The hotel lounge smelled of polish and overcooked scones. A few tourists watched them, whispering like schoolchildren when the headmistress walked by. Priscilla settled into a chair with the ease of someone who had never had to fight for a seat in her life. Hamish tried not to slouch. "I heard about the closure order," she said. "Is it really justified?" "It's Blair's doing," Hamish said. "Heavy-handed nonsense. I'm tracking other lines of inquiry." He regretted the boast as soon as it left his mouth. She raised an eyebrow. "That sounds dangerously like insubordination." Heat crept up Hamish's neck. "Blair's mishandled everything. Someone has to do the proper work." "Yet you're to support him publicly, I assume." "Aye, well." He cleared his throat, searching for dignity. "I've already discounted Patel as a suspect anyway." A glass clinked at the bar. Anderson stood there, pretending not to listen, which meant he was hearing every word. Hamish swore inwardly. Priscilla didn't even glance at Anderson. She rarely acknowledged people she considered unimportant. "Hamish," she said softly, "you cannot go around contradicting your superiors." "He's wrong," Hamish insisted, louder than necessary. "Someone else had motive. Patel's been targeted." Priscilla folded her hands. "You should tread carefully." The conversation died there, awkward and flat. She excused herself to meet her parents, leaving Hamish with a stale biscuit and a deep sense of having made a fool of himself. His humiliation worsened an hour later when Blair summoned him to Strathbane. The drive felt longer than usual. The building's grey walls looked even more unfriendly. Blair stormed into the meeting room ahead of him, already roaring. "He's been telling folk he's discounted suspects and running his own little inquiry." Davitt wrung his hands. "We cannot afford rumours of internal disagreement, Macbeth. A supermarket investment depends on stability. This is sensitive." Hamish stared. "Investment? Since when does that matter in a murder inquiry?" Blair smirked, enjoying Hamish's confusion. "The world moves on, Macbeth. You might try keeping up." Hamish took a slow breath. "Sir, what if the anonymous complaint about Patel was tied to these commercial—" "Enough," Davitt snapped. "Wild speculation. You will support Inspector Blair's findings. Publicly." Hamish felt the door close on him like a trap. He nodded stiffly. To argue further would only give Blair more to use against him. When Davitt bent to retrieve a pen, Hamish saw a glossy brochure on the desk. A bright, cheerful community store. The layout looked uncomfortably like Patel's shop. Same counter shape, same shelving pattern, even the same coloured awning. A cold thought slid through him, though he refused to give it shape. Davitt snatched the brochure away, face reddening. Irrelevant to present matters. Blair walked Hamish out, pleased with himself. "Back to Lochdu with you, and keep your mouth shut for once." The drive home felt like defeat. The countryside did nothing to ease him. Lugs greeted him at the station door, tail wagging, but even that didn't lift the weight. Worse waited in the village. A pair of crofters passed him near the post office, muttering loudly. Saw the Halberton Smythe lass dining with that stranger. Fancy folk planning their profits. "Aye, the toffs will make their money, while we lose our shop." Hamish caught sight of Priscilla through the hotel window. She sat at a table with a well-dressed man in a sharp suit. They looked like two polished pieces from a separate world, placed by mistake in tiny, battered Loch-Du. Gossip huddled around them like flies. Hamish didn't wave. He didn't want to stand long enough for someone to ask questions or to imply he had answers. Instead, he kept walking. The village had begun to feel tight, as if every word he said twisted sideways as soon as it left his mouth. By the time he reached the station steps, the humiliation of Strathbane and the whispers of Loch-Du had blended into something sour. He felt smaller than usual, which was saying something. Luggs nudged his hand gently. Hamish stared down the empty street, wishing he knew where the truth lay, and fearing he already did. Luggs woke him with a bark that sounded nothing like the usual half-hearted complaint about foxes. This was sharp, urgent, the kind that snapped Hamish upright before he knew why. The peat fire had sunk into a dull glow, throwing little light. Rain slapped the window in restless bursts. Something was wrong. All right, Hamish muttered, grabbing the nearest sweater. Luggs darted to the door, whining, then barking again. Hamish stepped outside and saw movement at once. A shadow hunched near the back of Patel's closed shop. The figure froze when Hamish shouted, then bolted. Luggs shot off like an arrow. Hamish ran after them, slipping twice on the wet lane. The intruder was smaller than him, but moved with brute force, ploughing through puddles like a bull. Hamish kept up for a minute, lungs burning, but the figure veered toward the kirk, cut behind a stone wall, and vanished into the blackness. He stopped, panting. Luggs circled a patch of mud, tail stiff, ears forward. But the intruder was gone. Hamish returned to the shop's rear door. The seal Blair had slapped on it was torn. The lock showed fresh scratches. Inside, the air smelled faintly of damp cardboard and something else. Nervous haste, maybe. He lit a small torch. Shelves lined the wall. A space sat empty where Kellock's inspection folder had been left the week before. The folder itself was gone. He crouched. A scrap of cheap blue envelope lay on the floor, soaked and torn. Not the sort of thing Patel used. He pocketed it. Nobody broke into a shuttered village shop for envelopes. The next morning, Loch-Du behaved as if it had been waiting for fresh scandal. Hamish found Patel outside, sweeping rainwater from his steps in a miserable little arc. "Someone broke in last night," Hamish said quietly. "Back door." Patel stared. "We were upstairs all night. Ask my wife, my children." "I believe you," Hamish said, though belief didn't help much these days. "But people said there was a light," Patel added quickly, defensive now. "Probably lightning." Hamish doubted lightning came in neat rectangles shaped like interior lamps. Before he could answer, Mrs. McLean tottered up, eager for trouble. "I saw a glow myself," she said, eyes bright. "Folk are saying you're pretending to be closed so you don't pay your suppliers." Patel snapped. "You're a poisonous old woman." The words hit the street like stones. Mrs. McLean gasped loudly enough to be heard in Inverness. Two villagers nearby stopped to stare, delighted to witness a mortal sin. Hamish felt the damage spread through Loch-Du like spilled ink. Patel had just handed the gossips a feast. Hamish dragged him aside. "Losing your temper won't help." "She provoked me," Patel hissed. "Aye," Hamish said, "and she will again." He walked away before Patel asked him to fix something beyond his reach. Back at the station, he tried sketching the figure he had chased, not because Luggs could describe anything, but because saying it out loud steadied Hamish's own thoughts. "Shorter than me," he said. "Built like a bull. Ran like he knew the lanes." Luggs thumped his tail unhelpfully. Hamish gave up. Blair phoned, of course. News had reached Strathbane before breakfast. "Evidence is being tampered with," Blair crowed. "Your negligence is astounding, Macbeth." Hamish pinched the bridge of his nose. "Nothing was taken that I can prove, but a folder might be missing." "Oh, aye," Blair sneered. "You'll no admit you left the door unsecured, will you?" "I didn't," Hamish said. "You didn't secure it well enough then. Daviot is listening." Blair put the call on speaker without warning. Daviot's voice seeped through, tense and nasal. "We cannot have further embarrassment. Do you understand, Constable?" "I do," Hamish lied. The truth would cost him his job. When Blair finally hung up, Hamish sat down heavily. The scrap of envelope in his pocket felt heavier than paper ought to. On his way to the post office, he heard two crofters arguing over whether Patel had staged the break-in himself. They stopped talking when he passed, then muttered loudly again as soon as he turned his back. Loch-Du kindness at its usual level. The postmistress eyed him warily when he entered. She was sorting parcels with exaggerated care, as though each box might explode. Kellock posted at least one registered letter the day before he died, Hamish said. Did he say where it was going? She hesitated, then leaned closer despite herself. Strathbane office. He seemed nervous, asked when it would arrive, kept checking his watch. What was in it? I didn't open it, she said primly. Unlike some. He didn't take offence. She never missed a chance to scold. Did he post more than one letter this week? She hesitated again. Maybe. Hard to recall. Folk send all sorts. A lie, perhaps, or just stubborn caution. Either way, it told him little. Outside, rain hung in the air without falling, just enough to make the world feel sticky. Hamish tucked the envelope scrap deeper in his pocket. Kellock had been trying to get something to Strathbane fast. Now someone was hunting the same papers, and Hamish had no authority to demand answers from anyone above him. He walked back to the station. Luggs met him at the door, leaning his weight against Hamish's leg, seeking reassurance Hamish didn't have to give. Someone's wiping the trail clean, Hamish murmured. Luggs whined softly. The loch lay still, pretending innocence. Hamish stared toward Patel's shop, its torn seal fluttering. The night's intruder had vanished, but the trouble was only getting started. Hamish began the day already irritable. Word had trickled back to him that Kellock had inspected more than just Patel's shop in the days before he died, and the whispering around Lochdu had taken on a sly, knowing tone. People enjoyed corruption more when it wasn't their own. He went first to a small holiday cottage let on the edge of the village. Mrs. Fraser answered the door with the look of someone expecting bad news. I suppose you're here about that inspector, she said, smoothing her jumper though it already lay flat. I'm checking his last visits, Hamish said. Did he say anything odd? Her hands fidgeted. He failed me on a fire check, said the extinguisher was out of date, which it wasn't, then hinted I could avoid trouble if I paid for a private consultation. I told him to get out. I don't deal with men like that. Hamish believed her. She had the desperate honesty of someone who had rehearsed the truth in case she needed it. Did he threaten you? Not directly, just smiled, too pleased with himself. Hamish left her with a curt nod. At 2 other cottages he heard similar stories. Kellock exaggerating faults, offering quiet solutions, creating problems so he could sell their answers. The pattern was clear enough. The man had been edging into petty corruption. Hamish, relieved to find a motive that did not involve Lochdu, seized it too quickly. A greedy inspector, a furious landlord, a tourist with a temper. Something simple. It felt like a gift. He allowed himself to relax his suspicion of Patel, even of the villagers, which was a mistake. Comfort made him careless. On the loch road he met Priscilla. She appeared as if dropped into the bleak landscape by mistake. Elegant, polished, out of place among the battered hedgerows. Hamish, she said evenly, you look tired. Folk keep dragging me into things, he replied. She ignored his tone. The supermarket representative asked me a great deal about local resistance, and about Patel's turnover. He seems very interested in small numbers. Hamish bristled. You're telling him village secrets now? Her eyes chilled. It wasn't a secret, and it wasn't mine to guard. Aye, well, you're helping them tear down the place. If by tear down you mean develop, then yes. She folded her arms. You never did understand money, Hamish, or people. That stung more than he wanted to admit. She walked past him without waiting for an answer, leaving him staring at the road like a scolded schoolboy. Luggs, who had trotted after him, let out a low whine, sensing the tension prickling off his master. By the time Hamish reached the hotel later that afternoon, his temper hadn't improved. Inside the bar, the Glasgow handyman, McQuaid, was slouched on a stool, boasting loudly. That inspector got what was coming to him, McQuaid said to anyone who would listen. Folk pay to keep their secrets, aye. Sometimes they pay in other ways. A couple of tourists gasped in delighted horror. One of the hotel maids pretended to clean a table just to keep listening. Anderson appeared beside Hamish like a bad smell. Sounds like your killer there, he said. We should bring him in. He's drunk and mouthing off, Hamish replied. Glasgow men say worse before breakfast. So, you're protecting locals again, Anderson murmured, smirking. He's not a local. Even better, Anderson said. Less paperwork. Hamish walked away before he did something rash. McQuaid's bluster sounded like empty noise, but Anderson's needle-sharp smirk got under his skin. He hated how easily the man found cracks to push. The station felt colder than usual when he returned. A memo lay on his desk, typed stiffly in Daviot's manner. Hamish read it once, then again. The closure order on Patel's shop is to remain in force until further notice. Any suggestion of impropriety on the part of Strathbane officers is to cease immediately. Hamish dropped the memo onto the desk. The language had the weight of finality. If the order held much longer, Patel's business might never reopen. No amount of truth would restore a ruined reputation in a village like Lochdu. People remembered failure far longer than innocence. Luggs padded over and rested his head on Hamish's knee. He gave the dog a distracted pat. "If they keep the shop shut," Hamish muttered, "we'll all be buying from that cursed Strathbane van forever." Outside, the loch sat dull and unimpressed with human folly. Hamish stared at the memo again, unsettled. Someone was tightening a net around Patel, and he'd been too ready to look elsewhere. He switched off the desk lamp. The room dimmed, leaving everything slightly out of joint. "Tomorrow," he said under his breath. "I'd better start looking in the right place." But he doubted tomorrow would be kinder. 2 nights after the Strathbane presentation, the Kirkhall lights were blazing again. Hamish realised the evening was already going wrong when he saw the Kirkhall lights blazing far too brightly, as if someone wanted to drag every shame in Lochdu into the open. Luggs hesitated at the door, ears pressed flat. Hamish felt much the same, but went in anyway. The hall was full enough to make the air thick. Crofters sat in stiff rows, muttering. The hotel owner perched near the front, pretending neutrality. The minister looked miserable beside the lectern. Patel and his family kept to one side, shoulders drawn tight. And near the wall, hands folded with polite patience, stood the supermarket representative, Mr. Clark, looking as though he were attending a school recital. Hamish took a chair at the back. Luggs slid under it with a sigh. The meeting began with the usual nonsense. The minister welcomed everyone and spoke about community priorities. A woman from the tourist board bleated about road signs. Someone complained about parking near the jetty. Hamish let it wash over him. It all felt like cloth thrown over a trap. The shift came when Mrs. McLean stood. She shook a printed leaflet so vigorously the paper rustled like a threat. "I found this in my letterbox," she announced, "and I'm not the only one." Hamish felt his stomach dip. Anonymous papers brought nothing but trouble. The leaflet was passed from hand to hand. Even from the back, Hamish could read the bold heading, "Repeated Endangerment to Public Health." Beneath it, Patel's name. And lower still, a quiet, insinuating line. Local authorities must seek properly regulated corporate providers. A few heads turned toward Mr. Clark. He lowered his gaze in the modest, self-satisfied way of a man who enjoyed being noticed without asking. Mrs. McLean continued, voice shaking with relish. "This says Constable Macbeth has turned a blind eye for years." Hamish did not move. He felt the villagers' eyes creeping toward him like draughts under a door. The phrasing was familiar. Too smooth for a villager, too formal for a crank. It echoed the nurse's language from the earlier presentation. Someone in Strathbane had helped to craft this. Patel rose suddenly. "You all came to my shop for 20 years, he said. His voice cracked. "You bought your bread from me, your sweets for your children, and now you speak as if I poisoned you." The hall tensed. A crofter near the front muttered, "There's no smoke without fire." Another whispered, "We need reliability these days." Patel's wife pressed a hand to her forehead. Mr. Clark cleared his throat with theatrical gentleness. "Our company always aims to support communities in transition. If Lochdu requires a reliable partner—" "Sit down," Hamish said sharply. Clark blinked, affronted, but obeyed the minister's frantic hand gesture. Hamish stood. The room swayed slightly with the weight of attention. "There's an ongoing investigation," he said. "No evidence links Patel to Kellock's death or to any illness. None." Before his words could settle, another voice cut across them, wet, heavy, and sour. "The fact remains," Blair boomed from the back. "The shop is closed under a legal order, and that order will not be withdrawn." Gasps scattered through the hall. Blair had that effect. His cruelty arrived bluntly, like a boot stepping on a hand. Hamish stared at him. He hadn't even known Blair planned to attend. Blair looked delighted with the effect he'd made, shoulders squared, belly thrust forward. One crofter, a man who had joked with Patel 100 times, stood and said, "I can't afford to stand on pride. If the shop's not safe, I'll buy from whoever sells. Patel's teenage son lurched to his feet. You're all cowards, he said, voice breaking. He shoved past the rows of chairs and slammed out of the hall. Lugs whined, low and anxious, as voices rose again. Anger, fear, and embarrassment churned through the room. Hamish saw two neighbours who usually exchanged Christmas biscuits glaring at each other as if preparing for battle. A tourist couple at the back whispered gleefully, pleased to witness local drama. Blair stepped closer to the minister. Make sure this meeting is recorded properly, he said loudly, as if speaking to the whole hall. Transparency is important. Hamish wanted to shout something, anything, but every word he thought of sounded petty or weak. The room had shifted against him. Clark gave a small, pitying smile as though Lochdu had behaved exactly as he expected. Hamish left before someone asked him a question he couldn't answer. Outside, drizzle misted the air, soft enough to be insulting. Lugs pressed close to his leg. Voices from the hall spilled into the night. Accusations, excuses, the scrape of chairs. The village was cracking, one jagged inch at a time. Hamish stared down the road toward the dark outline of Patel's shuttered shop. Blair's order had become more than a notice. It was a mark of shame, a wedge driven into the heart of Lochdu. If he didn't find answers soon, the wedge would never come out. Lugs nudged his hand. Hamish gave the dog a distracted pat and walked slowly toward the station, each step heavier than the last. Hamish knew something was off the moment he stepped onto the main street and smelled the greasy, over-spiced aroma drifting from the Strathbane van. It had sprouted a serving hatch overnight, like a fungus deciding to improve itself. A hand-painted sign read, Hot Pasties, Today Only, as if generosity rather than opportunism had put it there. Lugs sniffed the air and sneezed. By noon, half the village had queued despite muttering about prices. Lochdu folk could resist nothing so poorly as the illusion of a bargain. Hamish watched an elderly tourist bite into a pasty and stagger away looking green. Before long, 3 crofters were complaining of nausea, and a young fisherman had vomited behind the kirk wall. The van driver, McFinn, a man with a face like unbaked dough, lifted his hands in wide innocence. Leftover stock, he said loudly. Poor Mr. Patel sold it to me cheap before the closure. I only tried to help him shift it. Hamish felt a cold spike of fury. Patel had never sold anything to this man. But the villagers, holding their stomachs and dignity equally tight, seized the lie like medicine. Easier to blame familiar Patel than admit they had trusted a stranger with a hot hatch. By the time Hamish reached the station, the telephone was shrieking with Blair on the other end. This proves, Blair bellowed, that the closure order was justified and maybe not strict enough. You see the chaos? You see it. Hamish kept his tone level. The food came from the van, not Patel. Don't you tell me my job, Blair roared. Daviot wants a written report by morning, and you'd better not leave out a thing. Hamish hung up before Blair could add something childish. He went straight to the hotel where McFinn was leaning on his van door, smoking smugly. Hamish strode up to him. You're lying, Hamish said without preamble. Patel sold you nothing. McFinn exhaled a plume of smoke. Prove it, constable. Hamish stepped closer. I'll have the health department re-inspect this thing. They might like to see the state of your... McFinn grinned. A sharp, pleased grin. Threats, is it? I'll file a complaint. Harassment. I'm a law-abiding trader trying to serve the community. Hamish realized, too late, he had spoken exactly the words McFinn wanted. By the time he returned to the station, Anderson was already waiting with a folded memo. A complaint, Anderson said, smiling like a man receiving a gift. Against you. Hamish took the paper. Constable Macbeth is intimidating commercial operators to protect his friends. Ridiculous but dangerous because it was just the sort of thing Strathbane believed about him. Lugs nudged Hamish's leg, sensing the rising tightness in his shoulders. Hamish ignored Anderson and walked back outside, letting the air steady him. He drifted toward the hotel kitchen under the pretense of checking in on the vomiting fisherman. What caught his eye instead was a stack of empty pasty boxes near the bins. The supplier code on the side, plain black letters slightly smudged, matched the boxes McFinn had pulled from the van that morning. So the van's pasties had come from the hotel's supplier. Nothing from Patel at all. Local, not imported. Quiet, not dramatic. A small lie, but enough to sway a village that had already chosen its scapegoat. As he walked back along the lane, Mrs. Wellington stopped him. Such a shame, she said with pointed sympathy. Some people bring trouble with them. Hamish studied her face, trying to guess if she meant Patel, the van driver, or himself. She smiled sweetly, offering him nothing. When he returned to the station, the phone rang again. Blair's voice, thick with triumph, filled the room. "You can forget about that order ever being withdrawn," Blair said. "I'll see to it myself. Personally." Hamish gripped the receiver tighter. Blair's threat wasn't administrative. It had the sour pleasure of a man who wanted to crush not a policy but a person. Maybe two persons. He set the phone down slowly. Lugs whined again, uneasy. Hamish stood by the window, watching the van hand out its last greasy offerings to villagers, pretending they felt fine. The light outside had flattened into a dull sheet, the colour of bad tin. Nothing in Lochdu looked right anymore. He had lost the ground under his feet, and he wasn't sure how to pull it back. Hamish knew the day had gone wrong the moment he stepped into the station and found Blair already there, wedged into the visitor's chair like a malevolent pudding. Anderson stood beside him, smirking as though he expected entertainment. "Well, Macbeth," Blair growled, "you bringing that Glasgow thug in, or do we wait till he kills someone else?" Hamish rubbed the back of his neck. He didn't like McQuaid, and didn't trust the man's loud boasts, but dragging him in felt like the sort of thing Strathbane wanted. A quick display, not real work. Still, with Blair sitting there like a ticking boil, refusing would only make things worse. "Aye," Hamish said. "I'll fetch him." Blair's grin spread, ugly and pleased. About time. Hamish found McQuaid outside the hotel, hammering at a loose board with unnecessary violence. "You'll come to the station," Hamish said. "Now." McQuaid swung around. "What for? I've work." "Come along," Hamish repeated. He was too tired for courtesy. At the station, McQuaid sprawled in the chair like a sulking child, while Blair hovered, delighted. Anderson stood by the filing cabinet, pretending to read labels. Hamish began simply. "You said you were with Kellock the night before he died." "Aye," McQuaid said. "In the hotel bar. He was drunk and mouthing off. Tried the same blackmail nonsense he does to everyone. Wanted money for keeping things smooth with building permits. I told him to shove it." "Then you said he got what was coming," Hamish said. McQuaid straightened. "A figure of speech." Hamish snapped before he meant to. "You're lying. You followed him. You went after him." McQuaid's face flushed a deep, mottled red. "I never left that bar. You watch your mouth, you lanky scarecrow. I want a solicitor." Blair clapped his hands as if Hamish had performed a trick. "Excellent! See, Macbeth? We have a likely boy." Hamish felt heat spread across his neck. He didn't know whether it was embarrassment or anger. He released McQuaid after filling the room with enough tension to make Lugs retreat to his basket. McQuaid stormed out, vowing revenge of the bureaucratic kind. As soon as the door shut, Anderson murmured, "You can't handle proper inquiries, can you?" Just loud enough for Blair to hear. Hamish didn't answer. Silence hurt Anderson more anyway. He stepped outside for air. The drizzle felt like needles. The hotel barman, out for a smoke, lifted a hand in greeting. "That McQuaid fellow," the barman said. "You're not charging him, are you? He never left the bar. Loud as thunder all night. Last call he was still shouting at the darts board." "What time was that?" Hamish asked. "Around the same time someone saw Kellock arguing by the kirk. I heard folk mention it. Timing's all wrong." Hamish's stomach sank. He'd forced his annoyance with McQuaid into a theory and tried to make the facts obey it. Blair would use that mistake like a clawhammer. He walked away before the barman could say more. Lugs trotted beside him, ears low as if embarrassed for him. Priscilla appeared near the hotel steps, dressed as if the weather only touched other people. She stepped directly into his path. "I've heard the rumours," she said calmly. "If Patel is forced to sell, the supermarket chain will certainly make an offer. My parents don't want scandals attached to any decisions." Hamish stiffened. "I'm trying to clear it up." "Then do it," she said, "because Lochdu will change in ways you won't like if this continues." "That sounds like a threat," Hamish muttered. "It's a fact," she replied. She walked away without another word, leaving Hamish feeling like a man who had misplaced something important and couldn't name what it was. He returned to the station. The room felt smaller than usual, poorly lit, the kind of place bureaucrats forgot existed. Kellock's thin file lay on the desk. Hamish opened it not because he expected revelation, but because anything was better than thinking about Blair's smugness or Priscilla's cool warning. He flipped through Kellock's schedule again. The visits were erratic, 2 cottages one day, a hotel storeroom another, Patel's shop twice, then a sudden inspection of a fishing shed no one had requested. Each visit recorded the same follow-up reference number. Hamish frowned. The number linked to a handling office in Strathbane, one he had seen before, buried in paperwork and complaints and now anonymous leaflets. Someone there had touched every part of this mess. Outside, Lugs let out a soft bark, uneasy. Hamish closed the file slowly, feeling the weight of it settle on him like a bad coat. Something was being pulled from Strathbane's end, and he was only now seeing the string. Hamish knew something was wrong the moment he lifted the receiver. Strathbane offices had a particular tone, sharp, bored, and eager to make him feel like a nuisance, and the voice that answered had all three. Public Health Correspondence Division. Hamish forced a casual tone. I'm checking on a registered letter sent by Inspector Kellock. Routine inquiry. All correspondence is internal, the clerk snapped, not for village distribution. It might relate to an open investigation, Hamish said. That's for Strathbane to determine, not Lochdu. The line went dead before he could reply. Hamish stared at the receiver. For a moment he considered dropping the whole affair. Let Blair blunder, let Davitt panic, let the village tear itself apart. But the thought passed quickly. Giving up always sounded tempting until he imagined Blair's gloating. He went back to the Lochdu post office. The postmistress eyed him as though he had come to confess a sin. That letter Kellock posted, Hamish said. Anything else you remember? She sighed as if dragged into mischief. He was nervous, kept asking when it would arrive, said he needed it there before any changes were finalised. Didn't say what changes. Hamish thanked her and stepped outside. Rain drifted in a lazy spray, barely committing to falling. He pulled Kellock's schedule from his pocket. The dates lined up too neatly. Kellock's letter had reached Strathbane just before Davitt suddenly insisted the closure order must remain in place. Someone had used the letter, not to ease pressure on Patel, but to tighten it. Hamish felt the beginnings of something. Anger, maybe. Or weariness so old it circled back into resolve. He decided on an indirect approach. In the afternoon he strolled past Lockie Morrison's croft, knowing full well Lockie couldn't keep a secret to save his life. Hamish spoke in a loud enough voice to carry through the open window. Aye, Lockie, I've heard Davitt might withdraw the order soon. No new evidence, you see. He didn't wait for a reply. The rumour would travel through Lochdu faster than midges over a peat bog, and from there, back to Strathbane. He sat in the station waiting. Lugs lay under the desk, but his ears flicked at every distant footstep. Hamish trusted Lugs's instincts more than most villagers. By early evening, the first odd ripple appeared. Mr. Munro, the hotel owner, normally smooth and unreadable, marched across the street with a tight jaw and a folder clutched under his arm. Through the window of the hotel dining room, Hamish saw him speaking urgently to the supermarket representative and Priscilla's parents. The three leaned together like conspirators. A moment later, Munro stepped outside and caught the van driver by the arm. Lay low for a bit, he muttered. No more pasties. No chatter. Hamish's eyebrows rose. Munro glanced around nervously, not seeing Hamish in the shadow of the station doorway. Lugs growled, low, unsettled. The dog's hackles rose, not in aggression, but in wariness. Hamish approached. Busy evening, Mr. Munro. Munro jumped. Constable, didn't see you. You've called a meeting, Hamish said mildly. Never known you to hurry business so. This village needs investment, Munro snapped. Not shabby corner shops dragging us back into the dark ages. Hamish blinked. Munro's bitterness had teeth tonight. Patel's shop served Lochdu well enough till folk started spreading tales. Munro's lips thinned. Some tales are long overdue. Is that why you've been guiding the Strathbane van? Hamish asked. Making sure he stays in step? Munro's nostrils flared. I don't know what you're implying, Macbeth, but if you spent half as much time on real policing... He stopped himself, smoothing his jacket. I've business to attend to. He strode back toward the hotel, shoulders tight. Hamish watched him go, the pieces shifting again. Munro had the most to gain from a supermarket deal. Steady tourist traffic, subsidies, prestige. If Patel's shop disappeared, Munro would be the first to profit. And if Kellock had been poking into financial arrangements, Munro preferred kept quiet. But suspicion wasn't proof, and Hamish had been burned already by grabbing too eagerly at the wrong suspect. Lugs nudged his knee, whining softly. Hamish rested a hand on the dog's head. "Aye," he said. "I know." He returned to the station, sat at his desk, and pulled out Kellock's file. The papers rustled like tired secrets. One line kept drawing his eye. The reference number linking Kellock's visits to a single Strathbane handling office. Somewhere in that office sat the person who had decided Patel's shop must fail. Someone who had read Kellock's letter and used it to tighten the noose. Hamish closed the file but left it on the desk within reach. The room felt quieter than usual, as if waiting. "Tomorrow," he murmured. Lugg settled at his feet, but the dog's ears stayed alert. Hamish leaned back in the chair, uncertainty settling over him like damp wool. For the first time, he saw clearly that he was no longer just fighting Blair or gossip. Something larger was moving behind them, and Lochdu would pay the price unless he found it. Hamish woke to Lugs's barking, sharp and frantic, the kind that said something outside was very wrong. He swung his legs from the bed, feeling for his boots in the dark. Rain struck the window in uneven bursts, as if the weather itself couldn't decide whether to bother with a proper downpour. Lugs barked again, louder, and Hamish's stomach tightened. The dog didn't make that sound unless danger was close. He strode to the window and pushed aside the curtain. For a moment he saw nothing but the wet gleam of the lane. Then he noticed it. An orange flicker behind Patel's shop, small but rising, licking upward against the black night. "Oh, hell," he muttered. He grabbed his sweater from the chair and pulled it over his pyjama top. Lugs bounded ahead as he flung the door open. The air was thick with the smell of oil and damp cardboard, not the smell of an accident. A set fire always had its own stink. Hamish ran, shouting, "Fire! Fire at the shop!" The village was never quick to rouse, but crofters nearby were light sleepers. Doors opened. A man appeared with a bucket, then another. Someone yelled something about fetching more water. Patel's upstairs window glowed with lamplight, and his shadow moved in frantic circles before he dashed out, coat half on. "What is happening?" Patel cried. Hamish didn't answer. The small blaze had found cardboard boxes stacked beside the back door, and flames lapped at the wall. It wasn't a great inferno, but fire travelled fast in a wooden frame. He smashed the nearest window with his elbow, ignoring the sting of glass, and threw water inside. Lugs barked with each splash as though encouraging him. Crofters formed a rough line, passing buckets hand to hand. Within minutes the flames hissed into nothing but smoke. Hamish climbed through the half-broken window, coughing. The inside was scorched but intact. Cardboard had burned. A few shelves were blackened. The rags near the floor were still smoking. Oily rags. Deliberate. And not even well done. Patel appeared beside him, trembling. Who would do this? Why? Why now? Hamish didn't answer. Patel's face was pale and sweating, and for once he had no sharp words left. When the last of the fire was out and the villagers drifted back to their beds, Hamish stood in the charred storeroom staring at the mess. It was too careful. Someone had wanted a show, not destruction. He could feel anger rising behind his ribs like a slow fire of its own. In the dim corner he spotted something small on the floor. He bent to pick it up and turned it over in the weak light. A matchbox, hotel-branded. He turned it again, slower this time. Not just any hotel, Lochdu's hotel. The logo was smeared but unmistakable. Above the matchbox was a boot print in the thin layer of ash. The heel was oddly worn, angled inward, the mark of someone who dragged their heel or had walked on uneven stones for years. Hamish had seen that heel recently. He frowned, trying to recall where. Before he could pull the thought fully together, Patel touched his arm. "Constable, do you think this is connected to the order?" Hamish looked at the frightened man. Patel had endured gossip, lies, and now fire. Hamish's words came out short. "Aye. Someone wanted proof you're a danger. They didn't care how." Patel covered his face with his hands. "We should never have come." Hamish had no reply. Nothing he could say would do Patel or his family any good tonight. By morning the whole village had heard. Lochdu gossip travelled faster than police cars. Some crofters came to stare at the burn marks, arms folded, voices low. A few murmured sympathy, but more whispered that fires didn't start themselves. Patel stood grimly by the front door, speaking to none. Blair's arrival was as predictable as rain. He climbed from his car with a swagger that didn't fit his bulk. "Oh, Macbeth," he said. surveying the damage. "Look at this. Exactly what I warned you about. A hazard. A filthy hazard." "It was deliberate," Hamish said. "Someone set it." Blair smiled as if Hamish had complimented him. "All the more reason the order stays. I'll not withdraw it while there's breath in my body." Hamish felt his jaw clench. Blair walked around, poking at the charred remains with his boot. "Probably the shop owner trying for insurance." "That's nonsense," Hamish said. "Is it?" Blair asked. "Folks say he's desperate. Desperate men do foolish things." "Folk say many foolish things," Hamish said, but Blair was no longer listening. Anderson, hovering behind him, looked delighted with the morning's events, as though misfortune tasted sweet to him. Hamish turned away from them both, letting his eyes drift back to the matchbox in his pocket. And then he remembered where he had seen the heel. Monroe, the hotel owner. Hamish had noticed it 2 evenings before, when Monroe had walked quickly across the dining room floor during that tense meeting with the supermarket representative. The odd heel drag was almost comical at the time. Not now. Later, when the onlookers thinned, Hamish approached the hotel. Monroe stood at the counter giving instructions to a bored receptionist. When he saw Hamish enter, he stiffened. "Bit early for coffee," Monroe said in a falsely bright voice. "I'm not here for coffee," Hamish said. "Where were you last night?" Monroe blinked. "Strathbane. A meeting about, well, business. Late business." "What time?" "Late." Monroe's lips tightened. "I'm not obliged to tell you everything I do in my own life." "A fire was set at Patel's shop," Hamish said. "Someone used a matchbox from here." Monroe's eyebrows shot upward. "We give them out. Guests take them. I can't track every stray box, Macbeth." Hamish held his gaze. Monroe shifted, smoothing his jacket. "I had nothing to do with any fire, and if you're looking for someone to blame, perhaps you should start with the ones who stand to gain sympathy." "Sympathy doesn't burn down a wall," Hamish said quietly. Monroe looked away. "I have work to do." He left without another word, but his shoulders were hunched in a way that suggested guilt or fear. Hard to tell which. Hamish watched him go. Lugs at Hamish's side growled softly, not at Monroe specifically, but at the tension dripping off him like melted wax. The villagers' reaction worsened as the day wore on. Mrs. McLean said loudly at the post office, "Some folk bring trouble with them." No one argued. Patel's wife cried in the doorway of their flat, and their son refused to leave the upstairs landing. A few villagers muttered that maybe Patel had faked the fire to hurry things along. It was easier to blame him than to admit someone local had tried to ruin him. By late afternoon, Patel approached Hamish, face hollow. "Constable," he said, voice cracking, "tell me honestly, will this ever end?" Hamish opened his mouth, then shut it again. He had nothing to give. Patel nodded, as if the silence was answer enough. "Better if we had never come," he whispered. Hamish watched him walk away, shoulders sagging. The remark cut deeper than it should have, maybe because it was true. Lochdu could be cruel when it felt cornered. Toward evening, Priscilla appeared outside the station. She wore a grey coat that matched the sky, and her hair was pulled back neatly. She looked at the scorched wall of the shop, then at Hamish. "This isn't about food," she said. "It's about who belongs." Hamish felt the sting of it. Priscilla always had a way of speaking truths in a voice cold enough to make them seem like criticisms rather than observations. He said, "If your supermarket friends get their way, belonging won't matter. They'll pave over it." Priscilla's eyebrow lifted slightly. "You're angry with the wrong people, Hamish." Maybe she was right. Maybe everyone in Lochdu was angry with the wrong people. He didn't know anymore. She stepped back. "Do something before this village tears itself apart, and before my parents sign something they can't undo." She left him standing beside the shop's blackened boards, the damp air heavy around him. Lugs pressed against Hamish's leg, sensing the heaviness even if he understood none of it. Hamish stared at the burned spot until the daylight thinned. Blair's smug declaration echoed in his ears. Monroe's sneer, Patel's breaking voice, Priscilla's cold warning. Someone in authority had used Kellock's letter to lock the order in place. Someone local had set the fire to make sure it stayed locked. And someone, maybe the same person, stood to profit from a supermarket sweeping Patel out of the way. Hamish rubbed his forehead. Going through the official channels would get him nowhere. Blair wanted him silent. Anderson wanted him humiliated. And Daviot wanted the whole problem wrapped in a neat Strathbane-friendly bow. Unless Unless he went straight to Davitt before Blair could colour the story, it was a risk, a high one. Davitt hated surprises, but it was the only path forward. Hamish looked down at Luggs. "We'll go to Strathbane tomorrow," he said. Luggs whined softly, uncertain. "Aye," Hamish said. "I'm not certain either." But he couldn't let the village rot under someone else's scheme. Lochdu mattered too much, even when it acted like it didn't. As the sky darkened, Hamish stood alone beside the ruined wall, hearing the soft patter of rain on charred wood. Nothing felt solved. If anything, the fire had only opened more questions, more lies, more chances for the wrong people to win. He headed inside, Luggs close behind, already thinking of what he would say to Davitt, and how badly it might go. Hamish knew something was wrong the moment he woke. It wasn't Luggs this time. It was the silence. The dog lay staring at him, ears flat, as if ashamed to know what was coming. Hamish sat on the edge of the bed and rubbed the back of his neck. He hated leaving Lochdu, even for a day, and Luggs hated it more. But there was no choice. Hamish had decided to face Davitt, and Blair would be waiting like a spider. Luggs followed him to the door, blocking it with his body. "I'll be back before night," Hamish said, though he doubted it. Luggs gave a low whine, but Hamish stepped around him and shut the door firmly. Better the dog sulked than watched him drive away. The road to Strathbane was wet and dull, and Hamish drove as if the car might shatter if he pushed it. He spent most of the journey rehearsing what he would say, then cursing himself for sounding foolish each time. The closer he got, the more he felt like a schoolboy summoned to the rector's office. Davitt's secretary barely looked at him. "You're late." "I'm on time," Hamish said. "Then everyone else is early," she sniffed, ushering him in. Blair and Anderson sat to one side of Davitt's desk, like a pair of badly carved bookends. Blair wore the expression of a man preparing to enjoy himself. Anderson's grin was thin, sly, and ready. Davitt looked up, pale already. "Macbeth, sit." Hamish remained standing. "Sir, I'll speak better on my feet." Blair snorted. "He canny think on his feet or off them." Hamish ignored him. "Kellock wasn't just inspecting shops," he began. "He was squeezing money out of folk. I've talked to several who admitted he hinted they could avoid trouble if they paid him for private consultations." Blair waved a hand. "Hearsay. Probably folk trying to dodge proper inspections." Hamish continued, voice tightening. "His notebook is missing. Someone broke into Patel's shop, took paperwork. There's the registered letter he sent to Strathbane, the one that arrived just before the order was strengthened. That wasn't a coincidence." Davitt's jaw twitched. "All correspondence is internal, Macbeth. You've no right to speculate." "I'm not speculating," Hamish said. "The postmistress saw Kellock ask about delivery times. He said he wanted it to arrive before any changes were finalised. The closure order changed that same day." Blair snorted louder. "You've nothing but gossip and your dog's opinion." Hamish's voice dropped, low and sharp. "I've a village being torn apart. I've a man whose livelihood you shut down without proof. And I've an order you refuse to withdraw because you'd have to admit you were wrong." Blair shot upright, red as a boiled ham. "Insubordination. He's finished. Transfer him. Sack him. I don't care which." Davitt winced. "Blair, please." But Blair was enjoying himself. He thinks he's some Highland hero, saving his wee kingdom from the big bad city. Meanwhile, he shields that corner shop man, ignores procedure, and spreads wild lies about commercial development. Lies. Hamish's pulse thumped in his ears. Monroe is pushing for a supermarket deal. He wants Patel out of the way. He told the van driver to lay low after the pasty incident. And the fire at the shop. Someone wanted damage, not destruction. I found a hotel matchbox and a print that matches his worn heel. Anderson, shifting uncomfortably, muttered, "The timelines around Monroe and the van driver are odd." Blair rounded on him. "Don't you start." Hamish pressed on. "Kellock's letter didn't accuse Patel. It warned someone tied to a development plan. Monroe's name came up again and again." Davitt's face was slick with sweat now. "You're making dangerous accusations without evidence." Before Hamish could reply, the door burst open and a young clerk stumbled inside, clutching a folder. "Sir, we've just found these, misfiled in the Environmental Archive." Davitt snatched the papers. His eyes darted left, then right, then froze. The silence grew heavy. Hamish kept still. Blair, impatient, barked, "Well?" Davitt swallowed. "Photocopies of Kellock's notes, including a draft letter in which he expresses concern he was being pressured to emphasize faults at Patel's shop after a call from a party connected to proposed commercial development. He looked ill as he read the next line. Monroe's name is in the margin. Blair's mouth opened, then shut. Anderson looked as if he wished very much to hide behind the desk. Hamish said quietly, "That order was never about hygiene. It was about clearing the way for money." Blair's face convulsed with fury. Even if that letter's real, and I'm not saying it is, the closure order still stands until proper procedures are followed. I'll not withdraw anything until every last form is— Davitt snapped, sharp as breaking slate. "Enough. The closure order is rescinded with immediate effect." Blair stared at him, stunned. "Sir, effective now," Davitt said, eyes blazing with panic. "Issue a fresh notice clearing Patel's shop of all fault, and get a statement ready for the press before this spreads any further." Blair's glare shifted to Hamish, pure poison. A promise, not a threat. He now had an enemy for life. Hamish, suddenly exhausted, gave a small nod. Not of victory, just acceptance. He turned and left the room before anyone could stop him. Down the corridors of headquarters, the floors felt too hard under his boots and the air too thin. The case wasn't over. Kellock was still dead, and Monroe was still free, and Blair would never forget this humiliation. At the exit, he paused and looked out at the grey streets of Strathbane. He felt no triumph, only an ache behind the ribs. He had won one fight. Maybe the wrong one. Maybe the price was too high. But Patel's shop would open again, and Hamish Macbeth walked out into the cold morning knowing very well that the real storm had only just begun. The first thing wrong was the silence outside Patel's shop. Hamish saw it before he heard a word. A cluster of villagers standing too close together, staring at the newly posted notice as if afraid it might vanish if they blinked. He had hoped for something livelier, maybe even a cheer. Instead, there was the sort of hush that meant folk were rehearsing what they would say later to make themselves look better. The bright paper on the door read, "Clear to reopen. No violations found." No one touched it. They only stared. Hamish stood at the edge of the group. Mrs. McLean was the first to turn. She looked him up and down, lips pursed. "Oh, so it was all a mix-up," she said, voice airy and false. "Aye," Hamish said, "a mix-up made worse by folk spreading nonsense." She didn't like that. "Well, we can all rest easier now," she muttered, and marched off as if she'd won something. Others stayed. Some mumbled awkward words to the Patels, who emerged slowly from the flat above the shop. A few villagers tried apologizing without using the word at all. Mrs. Patel kept her hands clasped, stiff and formal. "Thank you, Constable," she said when Hamish nodded to her, "for your efforts." The pause before the last words cut more sharply than any accusation. She had every right to it. Inside, the shelves looked tidy and ready, but customers came only in trickles, and most of those whispered like they were entering a sick room. The Strathbane van crawled past twice, the driver watching the door with a narrowed eye, though fewer people rushed out to him now. Hamish walked up toward the hotel later and saw a Strathbane car parked outside. 2 officers went in, not Blair. Sensible men, quiet, professional, carrying folders. Monroe met them in the lobby with a smile that was far too wide. Hamish saw the way his hand shook when he adjusted his tie. It wasn't an arrest, just a long, hushed conversation behind the manager's door. That was worse for a man like Monroe. When the officers emerged, Monroe followed, face drained of its usual swagger. He didn't look at Hamish. He only straightened the guest brochures as if they had wronged him. Priscilla stepped out from the lounge. She was dressed for travel, hair immaculate, expression unreadable. "Well," she said, "at least the village will breathe again." Hamish nodded. "A bit late for some." She considered him, cool as ever. "You've reminded everyone that Lochdu can be awkward for business. Folk managed fine before any supermarket came along." "That's sentimental, Hamish. Progress doesn't wait for sentiment." Her tone was not unkind, just remote. It put a neat wall between them, and she knew it. He felt a prickle of annoyance. Folk also don't like being pushed around. "And yet they were," she said quietly. "By strangers, by officials, by rumours. It's never just one thing." He might have replied, but she nodded once and left. He watched her walk away, thinking she looked like someone who could leave a whole village behind without a backward glance. The Kirk Hall held a thank you tea that afternoon. Hamish went because he had to, although he'd sooner have sat on a wet stone. The tables were laid out with mismatched plates, and the air smelled of stewed tea and obligation. A few villagers clapped him on the shoulder with hearty approval. "You did right by us, Hamish," said one crofter who had signed a petition against Patel not 3 days ago. "Aye," Hamish said, keeping his face blank. Others avoided him altogether, embarrassed by their own quickness to judge. Lugs trotted between the chairs, tail wagging at anyone who would give him the smallest scratch. He wasn't choosy. Hamish envied that. The minister's wife fluttered up to him. "Quite the ordeal, Constable. The community owes you gratitude." He gave her a thin smile. "Folk owe the Patels more." She blinked as if he'd sworn in church. "Well, yes, but events moved quickly." "Aye," Hamish said. "Too quickly for thinking." The rest of the tea passed with awkward chatter and small lies. By the time it ended, the rain had begun, a steady patter on the hall windows. Back at the station, Hamish lit the peat fire, though it barely caught. Lugg circled 3 times before settling heavily at his feet. The station felt smaller than usual, and the paperwork stacked on the desk looked smug. He fed the dog, then poked at the fire until sparks drifted upward like weary midges. The quiet sat badly with him. The notice on Patel's door would mend nothing. Folk would remember the fire and the rumours long after they forgot the wording of any official statement. He stood and filled the kettle, letting it hiss as it warmed. He wasn't proud of everything he'd done. He wasn't sure he'd saved anything worth saving. But at least the shop would open again. "Folk are fools," he muttered. Lugg sighed and pressed his head against Hamish's boot in silent agreement. Outside, the rain ran in thin lines down the empty street, washing the last tape marks and damp streaks from Patel's door, but leaving all the stains in people's minds exactly where they were.